And we are back with more on News Talk, Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on the Mark Petrona Show. Well, I think it's a valid question. I really do. When you see the behavior of the Democrats now, in the midst of, on one hand, fearing the prospect of a massacre come the November elections, where poll after poll suggests the Democrats are in huge trouble. We saw the result in Ohio with all those Trump backed candidates in the GOP getting the big thumbs up by people in Ohio, in Indiana. And so clearly, Trump is on the rebound here. We haven't heard officially that he's running in 2024, but he's been dropping some massive hints that, in fact, he is going to do so. But what about the Democrats? Looking at the polls suggesting they are facing potential disaster come the midterms. And yet, with the Biden administration with his hands on the levers of war in Ukraine, you see them poking the Russian bear time and time again. I mean, even the Pope, the globalist Pope, came out recently and said that maybe NATO did play a role, so-called, barking at the gates of Russia and maybe helping to trigger that situation where the Russians attack. I'm certainly not justifying what Putin did. On the other hand, if you're going to poke the bear right next door to where it lives, well, it's quite possible that something bad is going to happen. That's why it's so important. And it takes me I get such pleasure out of bringing in our next guest, Tom Quiggin, who has a massive resume, including published author, of course. He's the host of the Quiggin Report. He's a court-appointed expert in the field of Islamic extremism, for instance, an expert in all sorts of fields involving intelligence, military, and otherwise. So welcome once again, Tom.
Good afternoon, Mark. Always a pleasure to be here.
All right. So that was a long, meandering introduction, but you get my point, right? I mean, I don't think I'm indulging in hyperbole here to suggest that there are some Democrats who are so crazed and such lunatics. I mean, especially when you see them, going absolutely nuts just over something like Elon Musk buying Twitter. I don't think it's beyond, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that they might prefer war with Russia over the getting obliterated in November in the November midterms. I don't know. Am I wrong?
Well, Mark, one of the unfortunate realities, if you delve into political science or history, is that when a government, however described, whether it's a dictatorship, a democracy, an empire, or whatever, if they get into trouble at home, there's nothing like a good foreign war to distract people from the troubles on the domestic front. So the other sort of thing that is emerging, as you said, even the Pope yesterday, who's a globalist and a progressive, kind of a tree-hugging kind of guy, actually sort of came out and said, yeah, NATO kind of played a role in getting this whole thing started. A number of folks are bringing out the idea that what we're seeing is essentially a proxy war between America and Russia. And of course, it's looking increasing like America's willing to fight to the death of the last Ukrainian to make this happen. A rather unfortunate set of circumstances. And not only that, even more interestingly, the Bundestag, the German parliament, if you will, came out with a statement and said, look, if you have American troops training Ukrainian troops on how to use weapons, and they're doing it in Germany, then it's not unfair for folks to say that Germany is playing a leading role in the war. Germany is, in fact, engaged in the war. So there's an increasing number of folks who are starting to believe that regardless of whether NATO carries its own flag into Ukraine or not, in fact, they're involved in the war, and it's going to make it an incredibly complex problem. Now, there is an interesting point in time coming up. Every now and again, there's a day that can be identified as a critical date, and that is the 9th of May, which is coming up 5 days from now. And it's important because it's Victory Day in Russia. And for the Russians, this is their day to celebrate the victory of what was then the Soviet Union over what was then Nazi Germany. And of course, folks tend to forget it, but the Soviet Union took a loss of about 20 to 25 million people during that war. It was catastrophic for them. It destroyed about half their territory. And, it's a huge fixture in their minds. And of course, every May 9th in Moscow, they have that huge military parade that everybody remembers. You always see those rows of tanks and missiles roaring by Red Square. Well, Putin will, of course, make an appearance on that day like he should. He's the president. He should be there. And there is a widespread expectation that he may actually declare the operation in Ukraine to be a war. Now, people say kind of like, so what? It already is a war, but it's important from a Russian point of view. It's important from a constitutional point of view. Right now, Putin says what's going on in Ukraine is a special military operation, and he may upgrade it to a war. And you'd say, well, what's the difference? It changes nothing, but it changes a lot in Russia. It means he can extend the period of conscription for those conscripts who've been forced into the Russian military. Right now, conscripts can be released at the end of their service as soon as their time is up, and he may not like that. It also determines how he can control things like war industries. He can order the country to go to a full war footing, which right now he can't because it's only a, quote, special military operation. So keep an eye out for May 9th. A number of things could happen, but if Putin decides to upgrade this thing from a quote unquote special military operation to a war, this suggests he's digging in for the long term and he's going to increase his resolve to go at it. Alternatively, there are people, not me, but there's other people out there who are hopeful that what might happen on the 9th of May is Putin will show up at Red Square, he'll watch the tanks go by, and he will declare victory in Ukraine, which would be a bit hollow. But nonetheless, he could say, we got the Donbass, we thumped the Ukrainian government, we drove the Nazis out, we've scared NATO. So let's just consolidate our territory, let's declare a victory and get the hell out of here. It would have a bit of a Nixon-esque feel about it when Nixon declared victory in Vietnam and left. But nonetheless, it's an option. So eyes out for May 9th. Could be an interesting day, could be pivotal. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah, next Biden will be declaring war in Afghanistan to be a victory. So they would be about as hollow as that. Tom Quiggin joining us, author of a book called Submission, The Danger of Political Islam to Canada, with a warning to America, with Tahir Gora Saeed. And great book, and you should definitely check that out. All right, so May 9th is the day to watch out for what Russia does. I mean, are you nervous about the fact that Biden is continuing to up the ante in terms of shipping these Javelin missiles, for instance, thousands of them, from what I understand, Tom, you would know better than I, to Ukraine, to devastating effect. And Putin, who doesn't seem to make a whole lot of idle threats, not only having warned that the nuclear option is very much on the table, but saying, look, if those trucks from NATO delivering hardware, military hardware to Ukraine, continue to do so, we will destroy them. Which, of course, would put Russia in direct contact and conflict with NATO. And after that, who knows? Are we talking about a wider war? And to what degree does that serve the interests of some of the psychopaths in the Democratic Party who would, at the end of the day, just love any alternative to what's coming in November, which is to say, well, we're at war, everybody. So, I don't think that they can postpone an election. Constitutionally speaking, but maybe they can make the case that, well, you better stick with the devil. We're in the middle of a war with Russia. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about the timing of it heading into the midterm elections?
Yeah, what kind of bothers me about this is, sort of a student of political science and history, and also, somebody who's been to a war and kind of seen what they look like up close, is that wars tend to develop their own momentum. They tend to develop their own logic. And I think what we're seeing right now is we have a group of folks in America who have their hands on the controls, if you will, determining the direction and fate of America. And it's perhaps not the most highly educated and highly experienced group of people we've ever seen around the White House. The initial steps of the Biden administration, like shutting down the pipeline on day one, the steps of the Biden administration dealing with their own southern border, Kamala Harris going to Europe and talking about buying cooking supplies while she was in Paris. I mean, it's been a bit of a clown show, and you're kind of left at the end of the day wondering, is there an adult in the room in the White House when they start making these decisions to ship billions of dollars worth of kit into Ukraine? And are these people who truly understand that wars have a tendency to develop their own momentum, and we tend to get large wars, quite often by mistake? Nobody planned World War I. Nobody wanted it. Nobody really anticipated it. But a series of bad decisions were made by people under pressure, and we wound up killing, umpteen million people. So this current situation has a feel about it that it's out of control. America seems to be wanting to fight a proxy war so they can weaken Russia. The European Union says it's, it's so serious about Russia and how they're going to punish Russia. But yet they're still spending 100 million euros a month on Russian natural gas, and they're still shipping the money to Europe. So if you're wondering who's paying for Russia's war, in large part, it's the European Union. So you sort of look at it and say, the European Union says they're so serious about this, but the reality is they're serious about it, but of course they're not willing to suffer any actual pain themselves. And then the other problem we've got is, especially here in the West, we've been told the entire world is against Russia. The world is lining up against Russia. And of course,
that's not true.
It's always bad when you get diluted by your own propaganda. So, for instance, if you break it down by population, governments representing about half the world's population are saying we don't want to get involved, or we don't care, or they actually support Russia. China and India at the top of that list, along with a whole bunch of others. If you do it by the numbers, just numbers of sovereign states, it looks like about 130 sovereign states have said, we don't care, we're not getting involved, or let Russia do what it wants, we don't care. And about 70 sovereign states have said, yes, we're going to take a stand against Russia in one way or another. So as much as this is presented in sort of black and white in Western media, as with most situations, it's really varying shades of gray. And unfortunately, when you get this kind of momentum, when you get this kind of propaganda, when you get this kind of mass psychosis, people do tend to make bad decisions. So interesting summer ahead because of the war, because of the economics, and of course the lead up to the US election. Lots of stuff going on. And then of course you've got the wild card, the United States Supreme Court, victim apparently of a major intelligence leak is how I would describe that. And that could be a turning factor for the war in Ukraine as well. I don't know if Zelensky's figured it out or not. But that leak of the United States Supreme Court is going to focus a whole lot of energy on stuff in America rather than stuff in Ukraine. So interesting summer, lots of wild cards up there.
So you think, if I hear you correctly, that the focus on Ukraine by the media is kind of as a spent force, and by everybody kind of turning its attention to the leak by somebody, whether it was a clerk or somebody else at the Supreme Court, on this draft decision, mind you, apparently to overturn Roe v. Wade. You think somehow Ukraine will be kind of shunted off to the side, become a side issue? I'm already detecting that a lot of people are kind of moving on a little bit, even though certainly the Globe and Mail spends all its time talking about either Ukraine or COVID. That's alternating between those two. But to what degree do you think the media's shifting focus might have an impact on the Biden administration's decision to, not pay that much attention anymore?
Yeah, well, somebody who lived through the war in the former Yugoslavia for several years, I was involved in an intelligence perspective for about 5 years in a row. It was fascinating to watch how the war sort of occupied the headlines, and then it went out of the headlines altogether and only came back every now and again when something particularly disastrous or something particularly interesting happened. And if you take a look right now, I do a daily survey of a bunch of different headlines of a bunch of different newspapers. And of course, lately it's been Meghan Markle got kicked off Netflix. Prince William did this. The European Union's doing that. Ukraine is actually falling off the headlines now as we get further and further into it, as people either lose interest or, it's pretty hard to run a headline 10 days in a row that says, Ukrainian soldiers are doing X, Y, and Z, and Russian soldiers are doing A, B, and C, and they're both battering each other's heads in. After a while, folks tend to get tired of reading about it. So it will be fascinating to watch. I think from the Democratic point of view, they need a focus on anything other than the economy, anything other than on energy, anything other than, domestic policy. So they're looking for focal points. And whoever did this leak, whether it was a deliberate leak by a person, whether they got hacked, somebody's email got hacked and the document got downloaded, whatever, whoever did it and for whatever reason, it's going to be a huge distraction in America for, I don't know, probably the entire summer, because this is such a litmus test kind of issue in America. And it's going to draw attention away from actual, issues like the war in Ukraine, actual issues like inflation, actual issues like the shortage of diesel fuel that's coming up around America and the world. And these are like serious, real world, people going to go hungry kind of issues. But nonetheless, it's better for the Democrats and the others to focus on anything other than those issues. So again, interesting times ahead. A lot of fun stuff to watch.
Yes, Tom Quiggin joining us on Saga 960, coming to us from Ottawa. And speaking of Ottawa, I mean, we just had the Rolling Thunder Review. I call it the Rolling Thunder Review. Obviously, it's not. That was a series of concerts featuring Bob Dylan back in the 1970s. But to me, it's Rolling Thunder. Okay, so this is the biker protest, the weekend protest. Just a note that you sent earlier, dysfunctional city council messes up again. Head of the police board of Ottawa says long-term solution is needed. They spent several $1 million, which I don't know, taxpayers should be pretty pissed about this, Tom. I mean, that's a lot of money to spend. Basically babysitting, a peaceful protest as these bikers. I mean, from what I hear, it was the onlookers in some cases, those opposed to the Rolling Thunder protest that were maybe the most violent of the bunch. I'm hearing reports of eggs being thrown at the protesters. Where was the response by police to that? Shouldn't the protesters deserve a certain amount of protection? They should be well within their rights to protest and therefore shouldn't have to be assaulted by egg-wielding onlookers. I don't know. What do you think? I know that there's going to be more of this. I know you were involved with this, with the organizing of this protest. So I know there's going to be more of these. There needs to be more of these in order for the government to get the message that these mandates, these travel mandates, are unacceptable to Canadians. But is Ottawa now going to be in a position of having to spend millions of dollars every single time you guys come out and have a rally?
Yeah, so a lot of different things to talk about there, Mark. One is, just by way of disclosure, I was a part of what's called Operation Dignity, which was Veterans for Freedom, of which I'm a member and a supporter. Veterans for Freedom had a memorial and a wreath-laying ceremony at the National War Memorial as sort of a symbolic gesture whereby veterans are reclaiming the War Memorial as their own, rather than the play toy of something like the National Capital Commission, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, Rolling Thunder was held the same weekend, which was the biker protest. Now, whether you're for it or against or whatever, I don't really care. It's up to you. You can choose to support us or not support us. That's great. What I do find fascinating is how utterly and absolutely dysfunctional the Ottawa City Council is. So just by way of example, with the Freedom Convoy 2022, the convoy said ahead of time, and they put out the same message again and again and again, the convoy is here until the mandates are removed. So what did the federal government do and the city do? Well, they told everybody it was a 2-day thing. They'll go away Monday. By Tuesday, everything's back to normal. And the convoy was like, no, we're here on an extended basis. And then somehow the Ottawa City Council was shocked that the convoy overstayed its original 2-day plan, despite everything they'd been told. Now, of course, again, depending on your point of view, the Freedom Convoy 22 was either a massive success or a roaring failure, depending where you look and what you believe. But whatever it was an exposure of Ottawa's city council and the federal government's complete and utter inability to deal with legal, peaceful protests, which of course is what the court said. When the court looked at Convoy Freedom 22, it said it was a legal protest except for the horn thing. So fine. Now let's move ahead to this past weekend. Organizers made it perfectly clear that everything was really going to happen on Saturday. It was at best a 2-day thing, Saturday, Sunday. And what did they do? They authorized 800 extra RCMP officers. They brought in municipal police from other police forces around Ontario. The police massively outnumbered the protesters, despite the protesters saying, we're peaceful, we're here, we're doing our thing, and then we're going away. Now, as you point out, the The only problems really were on the Friday night when a whole bunch of just local citizens showed up and thought it'd be all good fun to pour into the streets down around Rito, etc. There was, I think, a lot of early game jitters, if you will. The police were jittery, the crowd was jittery, there was some pushing and shoving, but end of the day, nothing really happened. Rolling Thunder went off without a hitch, other than, like you said, the only people causing any trouble were the Antifa, lefty, anarchist, kind of progressive protesters who were throwing stuff and threatening violence. And Op Dignity, run by Veterans for Freedom on the National War Memorial, went off without a hitch, period. It was great. Police showed up for like 5 minutes and said, hey, you know what? Them guys are across the street, the Antifa types, they say they're going to protest. We said, that's fine. Let them protest. We don't mind. Police went away. No problems. Now, interesting to note, and I'll be curious to see what the city of Ottawa does about this. As the Veterans for Freedom religious service and memorial wreath laying were occurring, just towards the end of it, Ottawa police got a bunch of motorcycles together and a few vehicles from the OPP, etc., and circled the cenotaph twice, circled the war memorial twice, as a salute to the veterans. So the veterans at the same time had asked a whole lot of people to just stay off the war memorial if they were doing certain things. So we had a whole bunch of people show up with the F Trudeau flags. So we had guys just go over and say, look, if you want to F Trudeau, that's fine, but please don't do it on the war memorial today while we're here. And guess what? Most of them just went away. And we had a few other people flying the Canadian flag upside down. And we said, look, we're veterans. We understand the upside down flag is actually a military thing. It's a symbol of a unit in distress. And we understand why people are doing that. But could you please just not do that today on the National Memorial? Because we're here about keeping the flag flying upright. So the whole kind of thing was... it was about healing. It was about veterans. It was about trying to get the country back on a unified direction. And we found it fascinating that the relationship, if you will, between the frontline police officers and the veterans was greatly repaired and, as I think, moving back in the right direction again, which I think is a really good thing. The mainstream media, of course, wouldn't cover this. The few people that did cover it called it like the Truman Show. Global News called, what are we watching? The Truman Show here? So it was just a kind of usual slander aimed at veterans and other people. And of course, I think there was also a great amount of disappointment on the part of Ottawa City Council and the mainstream media that there wasn't violence, because they'd spent the entire week in the run-up to this advocating violence, advocating they'll overthrow the government, they're going to stay, it's going to be another siege, it's going to be another, blah, 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 whatever it was. And I think they were massively disappointed to find out the whole thing was a weekend about love, about healing, about cooperation, about unifying Canadians across boundaries, rather than dividing them by their identity. So, yeah, all things told, it was a good weekend. Now, I did laugh, as you mentioned, the head of the Ottawa Police Services Board actually made an intelligent comment, so I got to kind of point it out. He said, look, we can't keep doing this on an ad hoc basis. This is costing us millions, and it's poorly run, it's dysfunctional. And here's the thing, I agree with him, and I think maybe they're getting the point that there's going to be an ongoing series of demonstrations in Ottawa from now until this whole mandate thing is fixed, until the economy is fixed, until the continuous corruption and hate and division and waste and taxes that are coming out of Ottawa. Until that stops, there's going to be an ongoing series of demonstrations. And weirdly enough, the Ottawa police force is set up as a municipal police force. It makes no accounting for the fact that it's the municipal police force of the national capital. So they're sort of making a suggestion that, somehow Ottawa needs to rewire itself to get it through its head that it is the national capital. And when there's going to be national level demonstrations, they're going to be in Ottawa. So anyway, maybe something actually good came out of the weekend over in the Ottawa City Council side. Maybe there's a bit of learning occurring. Maybe they're starting to get the message that the country's not too happy, and they're getting the message that these things are going to be an ongoing issue. So all things told, it was, I think, a great weekend. A lot of good stuff got done. A bit of learning occurred. No violence. And there we go.
Yeah, it's interesting about the media mocking that was going on online. And Global News, of course, the people who brought you the trucker arson story, one of the many stories that really proved to be entirely bogus. And speaking of the mandates, Tom, this tweet here by somebody named, Ryan Garrettson. So is the man saying that the only way mandates get lifted is if more people get vaccinated? Is he extorting Canadians with an experimental injection? We have sick people running our country. Well, to this degree, I think this person does have a point. I think it is about the shots. But not only do they want to push shots on the people who are unvaccinated, but they also want the vaccinated to get another shot. So it's all about pushing the booster. And they can't very well push the booster if they lift the mandates, because where's the stick, to threaten the people whom they want to get the third shot with? You know what I'm saying? Let's listen to this exchange now in the House of Commons.
We can't have relaxation of public health measures, more freedom, without vaccination and going through COVID-19. We can't have relaxation of public health measures, more freedom, without vaccination and going through.
Okay, so there already is a high level of shots, the jabs, percentage-wise in Canada, but it's not enough for these people. I guess they want 100%, I suppose, if they're going to push through their digital ID and they want people to have that QR code on their phone permanently, Tom. I don't know. To me, this is ridiculous. The pandemic, it's over. And every other country is dropping their mandates, but these slimeballs in Ottawa are holding on to them for dear life. And then they wonder why these protests are continuing on. And you saw that. I saw that online. Do people say, what is wrong with these people? All this talk about freedom. I mean, what is their problem? The problem is that we have millions of people who can't fly out of Canada right now, can't even take a train legally. We have cases where people's bank accounts were frozen. We have people thrown in prison for protesting, charged, held without bail, trampled by, cops mounted on horses in some cases. And so apparently none of this registers with these chimps in the media. And I don't know what it's going to take for these people to understand that freedom is under assault in Canada. Other people have noticed it. Outside Canada, we've had lawmakers, for instance, at the European Parliament. They've seen it. They've attacked Justin Trudeau. But somehow the media in Canada, or most of it, have these blinkers on, and they don't seem to either care, or they just say, well, I guess just get the shots and everything will be fine. Well, for many people, it's not about safety and efficacy. It's about being told whether or not they must get a jab or not. I think India just got it right. You saw that. The Supreme Court in India deciding, no, that you have to respect bodily autonomy. We have a prime minister in Ottawa who doesn't respect bodily autonomy, Tom. He thinks that the state should tell you what goes into your body or not. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch this whole United States Supreme Court decision, or not decision, but the leak of what potentially might be a decision. And all of a sudden, we have this whole outcry about bodily autonomy, my body, my choice. And then all of a sudden, we also discover there's only two sexes. There's women and there's men. Women have a right to determine, the direction of their own body, and men have no right to discuss any of this sort of stuff. And I don't know where the other 57 genders are. Are they allowed to discuss abortion or not? But yet, here we have all of a sudden, this whole issue of bodily autonomy has gone to the top of the progressive agenda because it affects women and their decision to have an abortion. And you kind of look at it and go, where were your concerns about bodily autonomy over the last 2 years when you forced millions upon millions of people to take an experimental vaccine, which is becoming increasingly clear is somewhat less than efficacious and somewhat much more dangerous than we were led to believe? So again, it's this massive kind of hypocrisy that is coming to the forefront. And I think this is going to be the undoing of a lot of the progressive movement. Pick one, pick the other. I don't care. But either if you believe in bodily autonomy, fine, great. Let's run with that as an idea. If you believe that the body belongs to the state and the state should control your body, well, then fine, say so. At least we know what we're dealing with. But I think in particular, I kind of had to laugh. I mean, it's a bit humorous, but it's also kind of sick and demented at the same time. You might remember Rogan, the podcaster in the United States.
Joe Rogan, yeah, of course.
MMA guy and all that stuff.
Yeah.
He got COVID. He took ivermectin, and people jumped on him from high heights saying he was taking horse paste, which of course is completely false. Ivermectin is an antiviral drug. It won a Nobel Prize. It was such a wonderful idea. And ivermectin has been shown in many cases to be efficacious. It actually works if you take it within the first 3 or 4 days of infection. So, okay, he got jumped on by high heights by people like Motherboard, which is essentially the tech arm of Vice Media. They're the sort of technical reporters of Vice Media. So they referred to him as spreading disinformation about the horse deworming drug he took. So, okay, that's their position, that you shouldn't take off-label drugs because it's bad, and Joe Rogan's he's a bad person, whatever. So what happens? We get this Roe v. Wade potentially being overthrown. What does Motherboard come out and say? It says they're talking about a drug I'd never heard of before. I think it's called misoprostol or something like that. They say this drug is relatively easy to acquire from veterinary sources, since in addition to medically inducing abortions, it's also used to treat ulcers in horses. So if you take ivermectin, a drug designed for human beings that won a Nobel Prize for its efficacy, then there's something wrong with you. But now, if you're a woman and you want to take an abortion, it's perfectly fine to take a drug that was actually designed for horses. And I just kind of look at it and go like, oh, come on. Do you not see your own hypocrisy? Do you not see your own problem? And that's not me taking a position on abortion or drugs, anything. It's like that. It's me as an intelligence guy looking at it and saying, you know, seriously, if you're going to run a program and you're in favor of off-label drugs and that's fine. If you're against it, that's fine too. But could you at least try and be somewhat consistent rather than doing a 180-degree flip-flop every time a new issue comes along? So I think, again, this undermines people's confidence in the media. It undermines confidence in public discourse when you see this kind of foolishness going on. So again, back to your earlier question, about Biden and the war in Ukraine and everything else. We're going to see all these issues, the abortion issue, the Ukraine issue, et cetera, as a way of distracting us away from what are the actual real world kinetic problems.
Tom Quiggin joining us on Saga 960. Very much appreciate you coming on the show, Tom. Tom is moderator of the Quiggin Report and author of a book called Submission: The Danger of Political Islam to Canada, with a warning to America. Tom, welcome to the show. We really appreciate you coming on once again.
Cheers. Thanks, Mark.
And got to take a quick time out, commercial break. Back with more on News Talk, Saga 960, and the Mark Petronis Show after this.